like it. Hot Brown, the Battaglia winner, is going to take the Jeff Ruby Stakes in front running style.
And Knicks go at 70 to 1. Knicks go. Tremendous upset in the favor of Breeders' Futurity.
And look at this guy go. Instagram 9-10 lengths coming home to a scintillating performance in the BizFL.
It is Mind Control, now getting clear by a length and a half. The hopeful winner, Mind Control, wins the Jerome in his 3-year-old debut.
The Gotham Stakes run at Aqueduct at the Flat Mile for $300,000. Grade 3 was considered to be by many the top prep of the three on the March 9th weekend of 2019, leading up to the Run for the Roses to be held at historic Churchill Downs. And a lot of buzz going around with Instagrand from the West Coast, trained by Jerry Hollendorfer, owned by Larry Best, who stopped on the horse after he had been devastating in his 2 starts, including the Best Pal Stakes, where he won by double-digit lengths in both races. Subsequently didn't run in the logical local preps, the Del Mar Futurity, the American Pharaoh, and then subsequently go on to the Breeders' Cup had he run well enough, which many people thought that he was certainly qualified to do based on those devastating routes and destroying and dominating his competition out there in California. And he came in after a long layoff to make his debut in the Big Apple in the Gotham Stakes. He was coming in here against some really well-regarded foes, including Mind Control, the winner of the Hopeful in 2018, who had missed the Breeders' Futurity and basically lost a little training time and rhythm in his routine leading up to the Breeders' Cup, where he ran 7th. Came back on the New Year's Day to win the Jerome Mile, skipped the Withers Stakes at 1 1/8 for this spot, some people believing that he has distance limitations, but in actuality Greg Sacco probably made a great decision to not try him at 1 1/8 that early in the year after a nice win in the Jerome. Get him, set up for a nice routine and a nice gap between the Jerome and the Gotham, and then off of those 2 races make the run to the Wood Memorial. Would that end up being, from an ambition standpoint, one that would be carried out by Mind Control's performance in this race? In addition to him, with those questions abound, was Bob Baffert's Much Better, who had, basically lost stride when finishing 3rd in the Sham Stakes. He kind of lost his action. Otherwise, many people thought he would have won for fun. Came back in a 6.5 furlong allowance race and crushed the field there, but people thought that he might be a little bit too slow. Then you also had Knicks Go, 70 to 1 winner of the Breeders' Futurity, came back to run 2nd to game winner in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and then he bombed in the Kentucky Jockey Club, which is as always held at Churchill Downs, where the Breeders' Cup was contested. So he bombed there, and then he stunk in the Sam F. Davis against Well Defined. He finished 5th there as the favorite, and so he bombed in both of those races, crashed and burned. He was looking to redeem himself when cutting back to the mile in the Gotham Stakes. Then you also had a son of street sense out of the Asmussen barn by the name of Tick Van Flew, and he was coming in with a little bit of quality, but he was still 20 to 1. And last but not least, you had a couple horses coming out of the Jimmy Winkfield Stakes, in addition to Not That Brady, who was 2nd at 1 1/8 to Tax in that Withers Stakes as the prep leading up to the Gotham Stakes at the 9 furlong route. But you had another horse in here by the name of HAIKAL out of the Kieran McLaughlin barn. Very, very nice horse out of the Shadwell stables. Had won that Jimmy Winkfield, was 10 to 1 coming in here. And boy, what an event this was. Much Better under Mike Smith for Bob Baffert went out and set enervating fractions. The pace was insane, 22 1/5. He and Knicks Go basically separated themselves from what we thought would be some contesting speed. Not That Brady and Mind Control, who dropped all the way back to 6. Probably not because he had a bad break or he wasn't feeling good on Gotham Day, but because the speed was so significant that Knicks Go and Much Better separated themselves. And then there was a separation amongst those who separated themselves when Much Better basically melted Knicks Go's horseshoes off, and he was gone. And he set enervating fractions after that, 22 1/5, then blew Nick's doors off, and as I said, horseshoes flying all over the racetrack with that 44 2/5 second half mile, 109.15 as the barbecue continued to increase and the temperature started to rise, 109 1/5. for the 3/4. 1:35 and 3 for the mile was the final time. And what was interesting about it, much better. Got out to a 4-length lead, separated himself, and then all of a sudden things started to close in, but he held on very, very gamely as Mind Control got the inside trip, started to make his move on the turn. As I say in the description, he was outrun in the early going, was 6th, got an inside trip, battled real hard, got the lead, looked like he was going to be the winner as Instagrand also made his bid on the turn simultaneously, similar to what happened in the Tampa Bay Derby with Tacitus going on the inside of Outshine for Todd Pletcher, the inside horse being able to win, and it looked like Much Better was going to duplicate what Tacitus did.
Here's Instagram on the outside. Here's Mind Control down at the rail. 3 of them across the track.
Even Instagram was struggling to get by him after he accelerated on the turn. Led briefly, just very briefly Instagram did. Kind of hung there in the stretch, but give credit to Mind Control and Much Better. And as in the shadow of the wire, all of a sudden, HAIKAL coming from 4th place, 5th place on the inside, had an inside trip, then saved ground, peeled to the outside, and then just took off and exploded like a 747, hit Jetstream, and all of a sudden was able to catch the top 3 horses in the shadow of the wire, kicked really, really hard to get up, and actually went clear and won by 1 length over Mind Control, who was a half length in front of Instagram, who was a nose in front of Much Better. A really exciting edition of the Gotham Stakes, and the time, of course, was 1:35 and 3, so it didn't quite reach the easy goer level or the Secretariat level right toward the end, and that goes to my point. The horses that even were chasing Much Better did kind of slow down. I think some things can be drawn out of the Gotham Stakes, and what can we conclude moving on to the Wood Memorial and the Bluegrass and the Arkansas and Santa Anita Derbies is that HAIKAL is a horse that seemingly, even though his pedigree might not indicate it, might want a little more ground. But keep in mind, even with those innervating fractions up front, those rapid tort, breakneck pace, suicide mission really. We don't know if he can be as effective going 9 furlongs, but he looks like a nice candidate for the Wood Memorial, which is probably going to be the prep unless Kieran McLaughlin feels that he's not ready, and maybe they can go to Lexington for the Bluegrass, or maybe even go to Arkansas the following week for the April 13th Arkansas Derby. He looks like a horse that may want ground. Mind Control, people think he's distance limited, but I think he earned a shot to at least find out for himself, along with the connections, whether he can be a candidate for the Kentucky Derby. He's accumulated some nice points with the Jerome, and particularly with this race. And so, and even if he doesn't quite qualify to the satisfactory level, to Greg Sacco's satisfaction, he could perhaps be a very nice Preakness horse, even though that's still 1.25 miles for all intent and purposes, with the difference of it being only 110 yards shorter than the Derby. But he's a horse that still, even if you don't think that he can go that far, he's by Stay Thirsty, Jim Dandy and Travers winner. He wasn't a great horse, but he was a good horse, and that's kind of got a Bernardini strain there. So even though he doesn't look as primed as his sire and his grandsire, he may end up surprising a few people. Again, I'm not saying definitively that I'm putting him at the top of the list, but he certainly deserves an opportunity to run in a 9 furlong prep. Instagram, a lot of people are going to be disappointed he didn't win this race, but I think he ran a good race. I mean, for all that time that he's been off, running against some decent horses, he ran a pretty good race, kind of hung there in the stretch, didn't quite, but again, he's running against better horses than some of the bums that he beat out in California, and one of those was actually Sparkyville, a horse who, of course, has since won the San Vicente Stakes over Desmond, trained by Bob Baffert, who we're going to be talking a lot about as well. But this was a little bit better field, and even if you want to, question the quality of opposition, this was a decent group of horses in here, and with that long a layoff, you couldn't expect him to win by 20 lengths, but I think that Jerry Hollendorfer, if he went this good at 8 furlongs, maybe not his best performance, but given, the time lag and the spacing and the layoff, I think he's got an opportunity to maybe come back and run in the Santa Anita Derby. Maybe perhaps he stays in and runs in New York again. Maybe the Bluegrass. Perhaps the Arkansas Derby. I think that Instagrand is possibly a candidate for the Arkansas and Santa Anita Derbies, but it wouldn't surprise me. It actually makes sense. He got over the Aqueduct surface pretty well. We'll find out more whether the condition of the track is to his liking to where they feel he can improve and do well in the Wood Memorial. Much better, probably not a Derby horse for Baffert, but he certainly is a horse that has breakneck speed. He's got freaky speed, certainly a Pat Day Mile kind of horse. I mean, running him in the Lexington would be a bit of an upgrade in terms of fitness. He'd get some Derby points, but probably, if anything, that would be a prep for the Preakness. I think Bob Baffert will probably be looking a little more at the Pat Day Mile on Derby weekend. I think that's probably the likely progression for him. He actually ran pretty well in here, and if he'd run a little slower, he might have been able to win this race and qualify for a 9-furlong prep, which he may still go in. You never know. He may run a race like the Bluegrass, and they say, look, we kind of came close to winning this race. Maybe if we're a little smarter, we can get in there, because you never can tell, even when you have depth, what's going to happen with these horses. So it's a lot like being an alternate on the U.S. gymnastics team or any other team. Be ready just in case, as if you're, on the team, signed, sealed, and delivered. So much better. Though most would say that he's not a strong Derby candidate, he could still be a horse that could be handy. And again, as I aforementioned, the Pat Day Mile could be an option for him along with some other one-turn races. But I think right now the jury's a little bit out on how far these horses will go. But I do believe that the majority, particularly these top 3 horses, will come back in a 9-furlong prep. Not that Brady was very, very disappointed. And rounding out in looking at the order of finish, HAIKAL wins it by a length. By a length over Mind Control, was a half length in front of Instagram, who was a nose in front of Much Better, who finished 4th. Family Biz was 5th. Tick Fin Flu was 6th. Nick's Go finished 7th. He's off the grid. Toss him. And then Not That Brady, he's a semi-toss. He ran very poorly in here, and we'll find out if this is something physical or it just could be the fact there were 7 other horses that were faster than him, particularly the top 4. And he's a horse that hopefully they think he can get some ground, and maybe they can be a little more effective, and these horses will come back to him in a race like the Wood Memorial. So again, but still, that there's cause for concern in his camp. But again, the exacta for this race, 5-3, $48. 536 on the trifecta, $208.48, and then the superfecta, 5364, $705 flat. So on the dot. So a very, very interesting race. Again, HAIKAL wins the 2019 Gotham in a stirring stretch run for trainer Kieran McLaughlin.
Go in second. Instagram is asked to pick it up. On the outside is the New York bred, Not That Brady. The opening half was 44 and 2/5 seconds. They race around the far turn, and it's Much Better with a 4-length lead. And they're all chasing Much Better, who has the lead at the top of the stretch, 3/4 in 109.1. Here's Instagram on the outside. Here's Mind Control down at the rail. 3 of them across the track with an 1/8 of a mile to the finish. Mind Control down at the rail. Instagram on the outside. Much Better is in between those 2. The 3 of them continue to battle it out. And here's HAIKAL making a late run on the extreme outside. They come for the finish. It is HAIKAL to win the Gotham. HAIKAL from way out of it takes the Gotham Stakes. Then it was Mind Control and a photo for 3rd, and the mile was completed in 1 minute, 35 and 3/5 seconds.